Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Big Mac's Harem, the final chapter. Hopefully, all of you have enjoyed this far. If not, go fuck yourselves. Anyways, let's hop right into chapter 14. The hours came and the hours went until they turned into a day and then turned to noon on the day after. 2 hours away from his confession, Big Macintosh paced around up in his room, looking out for the window for signs of the marriage, and then looking back at the clock on the wall. He had told Applejack earlier yesterday morning, and she seemed okay with it. A little curious at first, but okay with it. And even today, she was casually out in the yard tossing the frisbee around for Winona. He watched her with contempt as he wished that he could be as casual and at peace as she was. Then again, he was sure that her entire demeanor would change once she found out about his relationships with all of her best friends. He paced around and around his room. The time went on, and he sat and lay down on the bed a few times even. His room felt like a jail cell the more he paced around inside of it. Everywhere he went inside of the house felt like a jail cell, and the confession that he was about to make felt like it has to be his day in court. The worst part, Big Macintosh knew that he would be found guilty. 1 hour passed, and then a half-hour passed after that. Big Mac looked out his window and saw the ponies start to arrive one after the other. He could tell by the way they were acting that they were all surprised to be called out to the farm, but nevertheless they shrugged it off and went into the barn. As Pinkie Pie went skipping into the barn, the sixth and final pony, he couldn't help but gulp. Now was the time. He looked at the clock, and there were only 5 minutes left until 2 o'clock. Big Mac took a deep breath, approached his door, and exited out into the hallway. He gulped once more. At how silent the house seemed to be. It was silent like death. For a moment even, Big Mac was afraid of his own house and just wanted to get out of there as quickly as he could. He walked rather quickly down the stairs and then out onto the porch. He heaved a sigh of relief when he stepped out to the sunlight and sound. The birds were chirping quietly and the wind was blowing too. The barn, his confession and his condemnation lay literally only a mere seconds ahead of him. Nervously, he headed for the barn, his determination to be honest now the only thing that continued to drive him forward. His fear, his doubt, and even his common sense now all failed. With each and every step he neared the barn. Eventually, in what seemed like an instant even, he found himself there at the big red doors. He hadn't even remembered walking this far. Well, he had already walked this far, and now all that was left to do was walk inside and take it like a stallion. He took a deep breath once more and then walked inside of the barn, his heart racing, his body shaking, and his sweat glands working overtime. When he was all the way inside, the mares in front of him were all gathered together in a circle, standing around and talking. What they said he didn't hear because he was too afraid. They turned towards him simultaneously, it seemed, and then all did in a different way. They all said hello to him, of course, but some of them blushed discreetly, some of them smiled sensually at him, and others simply just smiled at him. Big Mac began to feel dizzy as he just stood there in silence and looked at them all. Each of them someone he had slept with and cheated on. A horrible reality set in on him when he noticed that they all really didn't have a clue. On second thought, them finding out from each other might have been better than him. He gulped and his eyes darted all around to each of them. From left to right, Fluttershy's head was low, but she was looking at him, though, through her mane. Had a slight smile and a deep red blush on her face. Pinkie Pie was skipping up and down in her usual manner, smiling widely at him like he was about to reveal some great prize to them. Applejack was smiling at her brother, but Big Mac could tell that she seemed rather impatient. Twilight Sparkle was staring at him with her beautiful purple eyes and smiling at him in a way almost as if she were thanking him for being so loyal. He hoped and prayed to Celesta that she didn't think he was about to announce their love. Rarity was looking at him with a sensual look in her eyes, and she had one hoof up, twirling her mane around in a girlish way. Rainbow Dash, on the other end, was smiling at him, but she seemed to be holding back something. A laugh, maybe. Big Mac didn't pay any attention, but he shook himself out of his trance and cleared his throat one time. He opened his mouth just slightly to speak, but then closed when nothing came to mind. He had written no speech. There had no intense preparation. After all, why would any pony prepare for something like this? It seemed like he knew what he wanted to say before, but now he was just drawing a blank and standing there like a fool. He didn't know how to tell them. He didn't know how to tell them so that it would apply to them all and be as painless for them and him as possible. Applejack shifted her weight over onto her right legs, though. And Big Mac saw that she was growing even more impatient. He had no doubt that impatience would spread over to the other ponies, whether it be the act of impatience of his conscience pressuring to say something. He didn't know, but Big Mac opened his mouth and then said with his deep voice, "If you would." He gulped and continued with a shaky voice, "Please look at the mare to your left." The ponies were a bit surprised and their eyebrows cocked at their shoulders and shrugged, but they eventually looked at each other. Then Big Mac continued, I've slept with the mare you're looking at." He started to speak. just a little faster. And if you look to your right, I've stepped with that mirror too. Big Macintosh closed his eyes and he launched his entire body up, bracing himself. A pain he had never felt before. He wasn't sure that what was going to come at him, whether it be words, stones, or both, but he knew that something was coming. He heard the pony say a few things amongst themselves. It seemed, but he didn't hear. All he could hear now was the sound of his heart beating like a hammer in his chest. He shut his eyes even tighter and hunched his body even more protectively. Still, though, nothing came. Maybe they didn't understand. He went to open his eyes, but just before he could, something came and Big Mac squeezed his eye back shut. Only it wasn't hurtful at all. It was laughter. He opened his eyes and saw Rainbow Dash flat on her back, laughing uncontrollably, the rest of them giggling and tickling at them. He didn't understand. He had taken the innocence from some of them and had turned around and cheated on him, and they were just laughing at him. Maybe it was a trap. Maybe they thought it was a prank or some practical joke. After all, what kind of stallion would go through all of that trouble just to reveal his sexual escapades with them and their friends? He only stared at them blankly as they laughed at him. He opened his mouth to say something, but sensing this, Rarity opened her mouth to speak. "Oh, darlings," she said through her dying giggles. "You just don't get it, do you?" Big Mac's eyes darted around as he wondered if she was luring him into some trap, but eventually he just shook his head nervously. "We knew that," she said and held back some laughter. "We've known it for a long time, actually." Big Mac's eyes widened in disbelief as he looked around and watched all of the mares nod their heads. Applejack chimed in. "Yeah? Don't you remember that day I went to spend some time with the girls? That day you were acting all weird and nervous and the like?" Big Mac could only listen in disbelief as she explained it all. "I told the girls that you had been acting weird, and then Twilight here revealed that she was—" Applejack held back a laugh at the thought of her egg-headed friend and her brother dating ya. She let her laugh come out and then tried to continue, only to be cut off already. "Yes," Shirley fluffed her mane up and then continued. "And then I said rather aghast, might I add." She smiled dangerously at him, then upon seeing the fear on his face, winked at him and continued, "That it was a strange coincidence, seeing as how me and you were fooling around." She went back to tinkering with her mane and allowed the rest of her friends to continue explaining. They explained how they each found out about it and how they each were able to tie it to the pony next to them. "Told you I'd keep my word," Rainbow Dash said. Big Mac merely looked at her. She replied, "Hey, everybody else was doing it, and I sort of kept it," she chuckled. Once they all finished explaining, Big Macintosh finally spoke up. "So, y'all ain't mad?" Applejack was observing her hoof casually and replied, "Oh no, we wanted to rip your head off at first." Again, Big Mac's eyes became wide and he gulped. Applejack continued, "Partly because you had cheated on all of us with each other, and partly because you made Fluttershy cry." Fluttershy had been the only one to remain silent, and she was still looking at him through her mane. Big Mac looked at her with genuine sorrow in his face, silently apologizing to her for how he had hurt her. One of the many reasons he liked her was because she had always been able to comprehend what he wanted to say, without him actually saying it, and he was able to do the same for her as well. She blushed once more and looked down at the ground. She smiled at him, and Big Macintosh knew that he was forgiven. Applejack continued on, no longer observing her hoof, "But then we sat down and thought about it. For one, you're a stallion, and well, just naturally stupid. For two, at least you weren't horrible in bed, and for three, you were satisfying our urges without actually hurting any pony. Now granted, we didn't like the fact that you lied, but since we're all friends here, we just let it slip." She smiled at him and promptly nodded her head. Big Mac was silent for a moment as he comprehended all that he was just told. So in the end, it was really him that had been fooled. Still, though, that didn't explain how acceptant they seemed to be of Applejack's incestuous relationship with him. He asked quietly with his deep voice, "And you don't think it's weird?" He was unable to finish and merely just tilted his head towards Applejack and then back at himself. It was Twilight who answered this time. She walked over and put her hoof around Applejack's neck, smiled at her, and then smiled at him. "It's not ideal, and I would just be lying to you if I said that we didn't think it was a little strange. However, Applejack is a mare too, and she has urges. At least, she's—" Twilight blushed. "Having sex with somebody that she knows she can trust and who is safe." Well, that was good. They didn't hate him or think he was weird, but still, this whole moment and all of these experiences had been so awkward. As if that wasn't enough, he didn't feel alleviated at all. As a matter of fact, he felt worse. They weren't angry at him, they didn't hate him, and they didn't think he was some weird hillbilly. They had been so good and so understanding about it. Here he was, though, still feeling remorse for how he hadn't been honest with them in the first place. Well, that was all going to change. He was willing to do anything for them to make sure that all was truly forgiven and that all of this could just be put behind them and never happen again. Big Mac cleared his throat and nobly said, "If there's anything I can do, anything at all, tell me. I don't want to hurt none of ya." He looked at the ground. "Yeah, y'all is some really great friends, and Applejack, you're the best sister ever. And I just don't want to lose none of ya." All of the ponies smiled at him, and some even awed, accepting his formal apology and offer. After that, there were more giggles. Big Mac looked up to see what they were giggling at, and was met with sensual eyes and looks from all of them. "You know, darling," Rarity came up and pressed herself against him sensually. "We talked about that, actually. We certainly, eternally, absolutely did," Pinkie Pie said, and came over to him, and where she too pressed herself against him. I'll say, Rainbow Dash came over and jumped on his back, much like she had before, a sexual look on her face, and Big Mac noticed that her hind legs opened extra wide on his back. "It's all really simple, actually." Twilight continued on the suspense and magically transported herself over to him, her magical aura frightening him slightly when she instantaneously reappeared and pushed herself against him as well. Fluttershy said and kicked at the ground, her blushing growing even more intense. "Yes, it is." She alleviated up and landed beside him. She too pushed her body into him and snuggled her head against his neck. Applejack finished it as she came walking sensually towards him. He felt Rainbow Dash slide backwards off his back. "You see, big brother," Applejack said as she continued to slowly walk towards him, "we thought it'd be only fair if you gave us all a really good ride. See if you can take all 6 of us instead of just one of us at a time." She winked at him and then promptly kissed him on the lips, leaving the surrounded Big Mac agape and blushing. Her kiss was quick though, and the next thing he knew she was pulling away from him and planting her lips on Pinkie Pie's. That single action kicked off a chain of events that would lead to kissing mares and a very aroused Big Macintosh. Before you knew it, Twilight Sparkle was pairing up with Rarity, and a timid Fluttershy was pairing up with an eager Rainbow Dash. All Big Mac could do as they kissed in front of him like this was blush and try to keep himself from becoming aroused. He didn't know why he was denying himself, but it just felt so wrong even though it looked so right. His eyes shifted from pair to pair as he watched them kiss each other's lips locked passionately at first, but then spicing things up by throwing in tongues as Rainbow Dash and Fluttershy brought their lips back and circled their tongues around the others, their eyes closed in an ecstasy. It all became too much for Big Mac. He could feel himself starting to become aroused. His cock came poking out of his sheath and continued to extend towards the ground. He moved his forelegs across in an attempt to hide it, but in the process his eyes diverted over to Twilight, Sparkle, and Rarity. They giggled and smiled as they kissed passionately on each other, and then all of a sudden Twilight pulled away from her and began to suck gently on Rarity's horn. When she lowered her head, Rarity gladly repaid the favor afterwards. Seeing this was enough to push Big Mac over the edge, and thus he foundered. Upon seeing this, the girls made their move on him. They kissed each other for just a little bit longer and then proceeded to approach him. Once upon, they surrounded him at the front and all moved in. Once upon him, they surrounded him at the front and all moved in on him at the same time, kissing, licking, and sucking on him. Fluttershy and Twilight kissed him at the same time, as well as each other, and then Rarity and Rainbow Dash started to kiss his neck and cheeks while Applejack and Pinkie Pie nibbled gently on his ears and licked the side of his face all over. All of these mares around him felt so good. They all had the most sensuous scent coming from themselves. They showed their eagerness and desires in all ways that Big Mac had never dreamed of, and they made it apparent that they wanted him. Before long, they began to work their way down his body, lower and lower and lower, until they were eventually all the way at his bottom, standing underneath him now. They all knelt down and began to kiss and suck on his cock and testicles. Teasing him at first, Rainbow Dash and Applejack kissed the underside of his chest, as the rest of them stroked his body and his cock with their hooves. But when it was apparent that Big Mac wanted it so very badly, they all moved in. After that, they all kissed it at least once. They each took turns sucking on it, and soon even began a little friendly competition to see who could take it deepest. Meanwhile, those who weren't sucking on his cock, such as Rarity and Pinkie Pie, had flipped onto their backs and were licking, kissing, and sucking on his testicles. Big Macintosh loved the way it felt and was barely able to hold his ecstasy back as he rolled his massive balls around in their mouths and kissed on them afterwards, again taking turns with them. Soon they all moved back over to his cock, and in one more attempt to tease him and arouse him even further, began to kiss each other with his cock in the middle. It was large enough for them to get a piece of, and the feeling of all 6 of their mouths on his cock, their lips pressed tightly and sucking on another's mares, drove him crazy. He was ready for sex. He could no longer deny it. He wanted these mares, and they wanted him. Sensing this, they all stood up, and then Twilight and Rarity gently pushed him down onto his back, onto a pile of hay. They all approached him with looks of ecstasy in their eyes, blushes on their faces, and aroused so apparent on their bodies. The spin stood like one of those tallest skyscrapers in Manhattan, as they all got into line, awaiting their turn for what was to come. Applejack was first, naturally, as she came up to him, swung around, and then backed herself closer to his face, and revealing her sucked pussy afterwards. Big Macintosh didn't need her to tell him what she wanted to do, and thus he wasted no time in digging his tongue into her, as he showed off his impressive skills for oral sex. Applejack leaned her head down and began to suck on his cock in an attempt to distract herself from orgasm. He licked her all up and down, inside and out, and was careful to clean her of every bit of her delicious juices. Next was Twilight Sparkle, and then came Rarity, and then Rainbow Dash, Fluttershy, and lastly, Pinkie Pie. Some of them showed their strong will by merely gritting their teeth and closing their eyes in passion as he ate them out as best and as quickly as he could, assuring that they got the most pleasure out of it. As he ate each of them out, some of them returned in the favor and some of them didn't, but he enjoyed it nonetheless, for he noticed that those who didn't return the favor seemed to taste better. But then again, all of them tasted amazing. If he had to choose, there was no way that he would be able to. Finally, when they all had their turn, they moved in on him once more. This time, though, they didn't line up to take their turns. Again, Applejack was the first to engage him, as she lowered her rump down on his cock and began to ride him like a bull. Meanwhile, Pinkie Pie and Twilight leaned their heads down and began to suck on his testicles, while Rainbow Dash slid through the middle of them and licked Applejack's pussy and the parts of his exposed shaft. Fluttershy and Rarity, on the other hoof, stayed up at his head and took turns kissing him as they enjoyed the show and awaited their turn. Fluttershy quickly and cutely made it apparent to Rarity that she wanted to go first, and even though Rarity herself resented giving up her position in line, she allowed Fluttershy to go first. All the best. Rarity hadn't had penetrative sex yet, and had only ever had oral sex. She was rather afraid of it, actually, and a kind of deep fear that she had, and a secret fear at that. But she convinced herself that if she was to lose it, today would be the day, and Big Macintosh would be the stallion. The mares all had their turns with him, except Rarity, and continued to rotate around and around in a circle. The way that all 6 of these beautiful, tight mares were pleasuring him at the same time was enough to drive Big Mac to the point of coming. The way he thrust his body about in passion and pleasure, and the way he flared his cock several times made this all but apparent to them. Suddenly they all stopped, and then Applejack said, "Oh no, you don't." She and the others backed away as again Rarity and Twilight used their magic on him to stand him up and put him on all fours. Before he could question what they were doing, he looked to see that they were all lined up at once. This time, though, they were lined side to side, and all had their tails cast aside. Applejack was on the left, again to be first, and then came Pinkie Pie, Fluttershy, Rainbow Dash, Rarity, and finally Twilight Sparkle, all of them waiting for him to take them. Once more, Big Mac needed no instruction as he came forward and mounted Applejack. She let out a groan of passion as he thrust all the way inside of her and then pulled back out. Big Mac decided that he would play it fairly and do them all nice and slowly, yet deeply at first. He thrust in and pulled out of Applejack 5 times and then moved on to the mare beside her. When he penetrated into Pinkie Pie, she let out a quiet, "Ooh, yeah," as he pushed all the way inside of her, and then pulled out and pushed back in again 5 times, and as deep as he could possibly go. After him, he moved on over to Fluttershy, and upon looking reassuringly into her eyes, but penetrated into her. It was only the poor dear's 2nd time, so Big Mac took extra care with her. After he thrust in and pulled out of her 5 times, he moved over to Rainbow Dash, and it did the exact same thing, only to have her let out a playful, insulting yawn and say, "Come on, this is taking forever." She chuckled and winked at him as she finished up, and then he moved over to Rarity. She gasped in both excitement and fear as he jumped onto her back for support and then forced his cock into her outer labia. He pushed into her deeply, and it was all she could do to hold back from screaming and crying. Luckily enough, though, all the previous events had aroused her to the point of where her pussy was soaking wet with juices, so the lubrication helped to dull the pain. Still, though, she counted the times he thrust into her, both wishing that he would hurry and both desiring that he stay longer. Finally, he moved on to Twilight Sparkle and did the same. She had sex with him several times in the previous months, and now adjusted to his size, and when he thrust into her and pulled out of her, was satisfied and thinking that she took it better than any else. Once he finished up with her, Big Mac went back over to Applejack and mounted up for another move on the ponies. As Cock now soaked with their juices, he thought jokingly about how if he kept this up, his cock would be as numb as his tongue was when he was eating all of them out. This time, Big Macintosh decided that he would speed up the pace and just not go as deep. 2 instead of 5 times, he would up it to 10. And so he did. As before, each of the ponies had different reactions. Applejack gritted her teeth and closed her eyes in passion, let out little ahs as he pushed into and pulled out of her, and the same with the other 2 ponies next to her. Rainbow Dash lowered her front end a little for him, and when he pushed into her and started to thrust, shaking her body, she said, "Ooh yeah, now that's what she moaned, talking about." When he dismounted her to move over to Rarity, she flipped his nose with her tail and said, "Bet you can't do better next time," he'd show her. Again, as he pushed into her, Rarity held back from caving into the pain and focused onto the pleasure. Thankfully enough, now that his cock was soaked with all of those juices, it didn't hurt at all. There was still some discomfort as he pushed rather deeply into her, nowhere near what it had been. As a matter of fact, it became so pleasurable, the sensation of his cock thrusting into her, and the thoughts of having her friend's juices mixed with her own, flung around inside of her pussy, that it almost drove her to orgasm. Just before she came, though, Big Macintosh pulled out of and dismounted her, almost as if he was cruelly teasing her and denying her orgasm. As she looked over and watched him mount Twilight, and took extra notice of Twilight's face of delight and by the way he was hammering her, Rarity wanted so desperately to just reach back and finish the job herself. What kind of lady would do that, though? She would just have to use magic. Once he finished with Twilight, who came just slightly, he went back over to Applejack and now really prepared to lay it into the girls. Now he intended to go deep and go fast. Now each mare would get his cock slammed deep inside of her 25 times each. He mounted up on Applejack and slung his waist backwards, and then practically threw himself forward and into her. She let out a moan and muffled scream of delight as that one single thrust pushed her to orgasm. Her juices shot out all over Big Macintosh, and though normally he would slow down, he didn't take it easy on her. He continued to slam his cock deep inside of her, over and over again as fast as he could possibly do so. He finally hit 25, and then pulled out of a moaning and shaking Applejack. Big Mac watched her with a sense of domination as she stood there and shuddered before him, having came several times. He knew that he shouldn't view her, or any of them like that, but it felt good nonetheless. He moved over to Pinkie Pie and did the same thing to her. Pinkie was a little more resilient, but even she, too, came after several well-placed thrusts. She squealed out in pleasure and moaned in ecstasy as he laid into her, even while she was in the middle of coming one more time. Finally, on the last couple of thrusts, Big Mac made her come one more time, and it really seemed as though he had simmered the normally overly energetic pony down. Again, as he moved on, Big Mac couldn't help but look at her with a sense of fulfillment about him. Her head was down, there was a deep red blush on her face, and she was panting quickly, almost as if she had run a marathon. Fluttershy had watched both intense fear and intense desire at how Big Macintosh had laid it into her friends. As he came upon her, she looked back with wide and frowning eyes at his cock. He minded her afterwards as he slammed down deeply inside of her. Fluttershy started to quiver with pleasure. She had been so afraid that it was going to hurt her, but alas, it was the most amazing thing she had ever felt. She felt so dirty, and she absolutely loved it. Big Mac pounded into her as he had done with the 2 mares before her, and after his first couple of penetrations made her come. Again, he didn't stop there, even when Fluttershy began to scream and moan out in pleasure. She came over and over and over again, her juices coating his cock, flying all about and coating everything it could touch. Finally, though, he dismounted a panting, worn-out Fluttershy and moved on to the next mare. Fluttershy was smiling, blushing, and her entire body was shaking, especially her hind legs and rump. Moving on to Rainbow Dash from her. Rainbow Dash said, "Gee, I hope this is a lot better than the last." She was cut off as Big Macintosh mustered up all of his energy possible and threw himself into her so hard that the both of them went a few steps forward. He slammed into her so hard that it provided so much pleasure that it almost hurt. She moaned as his first hard thrust into her made her come like it had done so with Applejack. Again, he spared nothing on her and made sure to lay it into her especially hard. Big Mac might have been quiet, but he had never been one to back down from a challenge. As he pushed in and pulled back hard and quick, Rainbow Dash came once more, and then another time, even. She came as many times Fluttershy had even. Big Mac finished up with her, and upon backing off of her, watched her wiggle around in pleasure sad. He figured that she might be a little more resilient than that. Best sex ever, Rainbow Dash said, and then moaned just a little. He moved on to Rarity, who was now ready for anything he had to throw at her. She now longed for him to be inside of her, and it was all she could do to stop herself from masturbating as she watched him give it to her friends. Excitement growing in her as he mounted her one more time. Rarity then let out a gasp and groan of pleasure as Big Mac penetrated into her sopping, wet pussy and began to thrust in and pull back with just as much force and speed as he had with the mares before her. Rarity wasn't as hardy as some of the mares before her had been, and she too came after just the first deep thrust. She was still tender from her previous runs with him, and it did hurt a little, but the pleasure that she was feeling was far greater than any pain she had felt. He slid in and slid out of her as quickly and as deeply as he possibly could, making her come once more and then build another orgasm right behind. He slid and slid out of her as quickly and as deeply as he possibly could, making her come once more, then build another orgasm right back up after that. Again, still as if he was teasing him, Big Mac pulled out just as she was on the brink of coming, blushing at the mess she made. Rarity could only stand there as he pulled out of her pussy, moved over to Twilight, and then a massive stream of her fluids came squirting out of her pussy and traveling a considerable distance. As Big Mac eyed and awaiting Twilight Sparkle, he knew that this would be it. He was getting close to the point of orgasm now. He was sure that Twilight's tight, wet, waiting pussy would be the one to make him come. Not that the mares before her didn't have to do anything with it, of course. He penetrated into her pussy and slammed it all the way inside of her, prompting Twilight to scream out in pleasure. Trying something new, he pulled completely out of her and then forced himself back and all the way in. The speed and intensity at which he did so was enough to make Twilight buckle at the knees and come. She almost sent them both down to the ground in the process. Still, though, she held out as Big Mac continued to thrust inside of her and then pull back out. Much like the mares before her turn, Twilight too came several times. Once more, Big Mac began to flail his tail and make it apparent that he was on the brink of a coming. Of course, Twilight wasn't allowed to have it all to herself, so just when he took one final thrust inside of her, and as Twilight came to, the mares all quickly dropped onto the ground and flipped over onto their backs. For a moment, it looked like he might recede back from the brink of coming, but none of them would have it. Twilight and Rarity both began to stroke, and some vibrating sensations through his cock by using their magic, giving him the final push that he needed. Finally, Big Macintosh unloaded his seed all over him. It was the biggest, thickest, and strictest load that he had ever let loose. He reared up at just the right time, and his cum made the most perfect arch, landing first flat on Applejack, then coming down on the rest of the mares. Seconds uneven, his cock continued to shoot off his massive load as it covered all of their faces, chests, and bodies. By the time he got down, the mares were absolutely coated with his seed. Woozy from having had such powerful orgasm, Big Macintosh wavered and stumbled backwards and eventually fell flat onto the haystack that he had been on before. When he looked up, though, he saw the girls licking each other clean and kissing each other once more, only this time swapping his cum from mouth to mouth. It took them a good while to clean each other, and Rarity wasn't entirely happy about having his cum in her mane again, and nor was she delighted by the fact that Pinkie Pie kept trying to lick it out. But nonetheless, she enjoyed the act, and Big Macintosh enjoyed the show. Shortly after they all properly cleaned off with the use of towels in the nearby closet, they all joined Big Macintosh and Elaine on the haystack. They cuddled with him, kissed him, and kissed his lips. They cuddled with him, kissed on him, and kissed his lips. So in the end, it all worked out for Big Macintosh. None of them hated him. None of them thought he was weird. He wasn't forced to make a decision that could have otherwise been bad or good. And best of all, he still had all of his friends. While cuddling, though, Rainbow Dash adjusted herself so that she would be a little more comfortable. In the process, though, something poked her in the sides. Ouch, she said mostly to herself, and then began to sift around in the hay, only to pull out a thick book with fox golden inlays on the covers. A love like no other, Rainbow Dash said the title out loud. A smile crossed her face, and she said, "Wait." She sifted through the hay a little more. Big Mac starting to grow nervous and eventually unveiled even more romance books. After she read the last title, she fell down laughing on his chest. The other mares soon joining in laughing at him. Twilight Sparkle even joined in. "So that's where you've been keeping all of the books I've lent you. I've always wondered why they smell like hay," she continued chuckling. "Wait," Applejack struggled through her laughter. "You mean to tell me there's been more?" This revelation prompted even more intense laughter from them all. Big Mac rolled his eyes inside of his side as he watched all of the mayors around him laugh at his secret love books. So it had been an okay day for him. Not good and not bad. On the one hoof, every pony knew that he was a reader with a soft spot for romance. But the other hoof, at least he got all the mayors. The end. Oh god damn it, let me show this Big Mac right now. Oh god damn it. Fuck, that was a long ass chapter. Shit. Hopefully all you guys have enjoyed. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Good fucking bye. Till the next time.
100,000 stories have filled my head as I look for the end.